Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this installment of the History Highlights series. My name is Annie Black. I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers for the museum, and we're happy to have you with us tonight. A couple of notes before I introduce our speaker. I wanted to give a big thank you to our community partners for this program: Dallas Jewish Historical Society, George W. Bush Presidential Center, Legacy Senior Communities, SMU Human Rights Program, and the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. Thank you so much for your support of this event, and we appreciate all the work that you all do. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end of this program, so if you want to go ahead and locate your Q&A button. If you're on a computer, it will likely be at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a tablet or phone, you might find it at the top. But anytime you have a question during the program, please go ahead and open that and you can go ahead and type in your question and we will address those at the end. Dr. Sarah Abosh-Jacobson, our Chief of Education, will join us for Q&A as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Felicia Williamson, our Director of Library and Archives. Felicia.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to spend a little time with you this evening talking about some of our most interesting artifact collections. I'm going to take a moment to thank some donors who are joining us on for this talk. The Rohan family, the Albert family, Marcia Malk, and the COHN family. We're so glad you're able to join us. We'll be speaking about some of their family's artifacts that they've been able to donate to the museum. Right now I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at some of these artifacts. The focus of this evening's talk is on artifacts and archival collection items that are available through online searching on our website. We have about 10,000 artifacts in our collection, and every week or two I add more to our online search portal, trying to make more and more evidence of the Holocaust and of human rights in a local context available for researchers and students specifically. From anywhere. And as we know, during these strange times, having access to good information and research materials and educational programming is more important than it really ever has been. So here, let me share my screen and we'll take a look. Okay. So thank you again to our archival donors. I want to take a minute. I get asked a lot how the museum receives artifacts, and that process has started back. Our first artifact donation was in 1980, before the museum was a museum. Our museum was founded in 1984 as a Holocaust Memorial and Education Center, and we started collecting really Holocaust-specific artifacts, and really chiefly from those victims who had been in concentration camps. Along the way, including after I joined the staff 5 years ago, we expanded our focus to include pre- and post-war Jewish life, and really the stories of any population affected by Nazi terror. And then, as you all know, we have expanded our collecting focus to include human rights. That's human rights in an American and even local context. And so we started collecting materials related to that in 2018. And some of the artifacts we're going to talk tonight were collected after we expanded to include human rights, and really some interesting stuff that gave me personally an opportunity to learn more about our own history. So, and the way it often happens is an individual or family realizes they have something that could be significant and contacts me, or has me reach out to them through word of mouth. And that process sometimes is very quick. I get a call, I have this artifact, I want it to go to a good place, I want it to be cared for, will you take it? I make sure it fits our collection development policy, and we accept the artifact. Sometimes that process can be much more intricate and lengthy, and it can be a situation where trust is built between me and the family, and it can be challenging to let go of those tangible reminders of our own family and history. So I'm so grateful to our donors for trusting the museum to take care of these materials. And part of that trust means that we're making it available, that it has meaning and impact. And placing these materials online is one way we try to expand the availability of information about challenging topics and difficult histories. So I want to just let everyone know how to find all the resources we have online. This is our website, Dallas Holocaust Human Rights Museum. Our website is dhhrm.org. And then, as you can see, it's pointing right there to research. Once you click on that, you come to a collections search portal. And once you click search the collections database, you'll be able to search all 1,700 items that are online. So this is just a snapshot of the internal search page on the website to give you some idea of what you're looking at. We do have about 3,500 library books in our library, and those are available for research. So there's another portal to look at the library books. I wanted to take just a moment and talk about what it takes to make a searchable record. It takes a lot of research, time, and effort, and I thought it would be instructive to show the back end of our database. So this right here is the back end of our research database. Our database is called Past Perfect. And as we go through collections and catalog collections and make them available, we enter between 25 and 40 data points for every single item. So imagine you have a family collection, and this is not unusual, and you have about 200 items, collection of letters and photographs, a diary, maybe some three-dimensional artifacts. That collection could take us months to fully process. And included in that process is digitization. We create a digital copy of the item. So if it's a two-dimensional object, we scan it in a high resolution. If it's a three-dimensional object, we do high-resolution 3D photography. And then it all comes together to make this record that's fully searchable. And then the next step, getting to online, it goes through an editing process and then placed on our online database. So it's searchable through an online database through our website. So again, of the 10,000 items in our collection, about 1,700 items have made it through the whole process, and we're adding more to it every day. This is just another close-up of the catalog record. And then just the idea of having a high-resolution scan of the object for researchers. And then here's how it looks online. I want to take just a brief moment and explain, if you're doing research and you need help, you need to talk to me about something, or if you're looking at your own family's collection, whether it's at this repository or another museum or repository, you need to keep track of the unique identifier applied to that object. And in our case, we call it a catalog number, and this number follows that object everywhere it goes. So when it's in a folder in the vault, it's got this number on it. When it's online, you can always find that number, and then that number traces back to the file names for the digital files and to the catalog records in the database. Okay, so we're going to take a few moments and talk about a handful of collections that are fully searchable and available online right now. And really, they tell, to my mind, these collections show a huge depth and breadth of the kinds of situations that families have found themselves in while fleeing the Nazis. And then we have one collection that features an African-American family during World War II. So here we go. Let's get into it. So the COHN family. WILLI COHN was a survivor who ended up in the Dallas area. His parents, his father was a World War I soldier, and he owned a clothing and furniture store. WILLI is an interesting character, and we have an oral history interview with him taken by family members, and we're so grateful to have it. And, you know, his story is one where, you know, if you thought, oh, I'm going to write a screenplay, a really interesting screenplay about how someone escaped the Nazis or survived and their story of how they escaped, this would be a contender in my view. It's so fascinating. So WILLI was a teenager, and he was always sketching, creating sketches and cartoons. But as the Nazi Party became more dominant in people's lives in Nazi Germany, he began sketching political figures and events, depicting Nazi characters in less than positive light. And eventually, his sketchbook was confiscated by the Gestapo. So essentially, Willi gets pulled aside and said, hey, you need to make yourself scarce, get out of here. They're gonna come and arrest you. He was Jewish, but also was making anti-Nazi political statements through his sketches. And so even though he was a teenager, he was in big, big trouble. Long story short, he went into hiding and then made his way to what was then Palestine, and it's now Israel, and eventually ended up fighting in the Palestinian division of the British Army, which is just an amazing journey to consider. And he represents another part of the story in that families in the 1930s, Jewish families, often had to make extremely painful decisions about how and who to save. It was rare that a family had the wherewithal to escape as a unit. And for Willi's parents, they recognized that Willi was in the most danger, and they helped him escape, and they remained behind. His sister also escaped, also made her way to Palestine, but his parents were back in Germany and in very serious danger. So we have some documents that the family donated to us that we're gonna show you. And unfortunately, we don't have the sketchbook, but I have an example of his sketches that I'm gonna share with you as well. So, this is a postcard to Willi. He's in Palestine from his family back in Germany in January 1939. Richard and Augusta were Willi's parents, and Richard writes that they had a great deal of destruction during Kristallnacht. They're trying to sell their house. Another way of saying that is they were being forced to sell their house. And Augusta, as any mother would be, is very concerned about her son and hoping he has support in Palestine, so far away from her family, from his family. So here's another telegram. This is to Willi's uncle in Tel Aviv from his mother in Germany in 1941. In the background, Augusta and Richard obviously were trying to get out as well, but it was increasingly difficult to escape. Borders were closing, visas were hard to come by. Augusta eventually got approved for a visa, but was unable to get passage on a ship. And so her situation was increasingly dire. And then we find out that Augusta has been sent to Warsaw. And so from the lens of history, we know that that's a bad sign, because she's been deported eastward with the intention of being sent to a concentration camp. And this, in fact, was the last time Willi and Hannah, his sister, heard from their mother. And as I promised, we do have one example of Willi's sketches. This is from 1983, showing a political prisoner in Latin America. Pretty interesting drawing. You can imagine perhaps what an 18-year-old Willi might have been drawing about the political situation in Nazi Germany. Okay, this next family has of course, entirely different scenario, and a very different path that they take. The Tannenbaum and Rosenberg / Rohan family collection, Solomon and Hannah Rosenberg. Hannah Rosenberg's maiden name is Tannenbaum, had 5 children. Hannah's brother his name was Oscar Tannenbaum, and he had settled in North Texas before the war. And then Solomon and Hannah had 5 children: Emmanuel, Marcus, David, Erica, and Aaron. And their story is fascinating in and of itself. Emmanuel, Marcus, and David ended up surviving several camps, and Erica was placed in hiding. Aaron, the youngest brother, was murdered in Auschwitz, as were their parents. And the reason we know so much about their family is the family has taken a great deal of time and effort to record their stories, but also Oscar Tannenbaum was really an amazing character. And in my mind, we use the term upstander in the museum to talk about someone who stood up and did something at their own risk and to help someone else. And Oscar Tannenbaum, the collection the Rohan family donated to us, had more than 300 letters and documents where he is working tirelessly to save these siblings. So there's 4 siblings. Aaron, of course, was murdered in 1942 in Auschwitz, but these 4 other siblings and just a host of other family members, and even people that Oscar didn't really have a direct connection with. Oscar spent the duration of really the escalation of the war, starting in 1938-39 until well after the war, working to save his family and extended family through writing just hundreds of letters, spending thousands of dollars, providing affidavits, bank account information, writing congressmen, writing anyone who would accept a letter, really, trying to save these people who were suffering and in danger in Europe. It's amazing to see that we even have in this collection an envelope where he's trying to keep track of expenditures for just one person he's trying to save. So really doing an immense amount of correspondence and paperwork. It seemed to me that he was writing multiple letters a day. And of course, the frustration being that so much of what he was trying to do proved impossible because of the restrictions on travel and the war and the escalating conflict and limited visa access, limited ability to book a ship, just immense challenges. So this collection of documents here is all for a visa application to sponsor his nieces and nephews, Emmanuel, Marcus, David, and Erica. And as you can see, he had to have a huge amount of information available to prove that he could sponsor these folks. And he tried in the early 40s and again after the war. And eventually he did sponsor all of them to come to the United States. Just as further evidence of the work he was doing, this letter is an exchange between Oscar Tannenbaum and Sam Rayburn, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. If you've been to DC, I don't know when the Rayburn building was called the Rayburn building, but as you walk along on your way to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, you walk right under or next to the Rayburn building. And this letter, dated in 1946, he refers to a letter that he wrote to Sam Rayburn in 1941 and says, in 1941, you said that all the documents I had essentially were meaningless and that you couldn't do anything because of the war. And now I'm writing back again, trying to save my family member. At this point, he's trying to save a family member named Herman Lichen, who ended up spending quite a bit of time in Braindonk, which is a concentration camp. And here he is, he's gathered all the documentation once more. He's trying again in 1946. This, just to show the breadth and depth of what Oscar Tannenbaum was trying to do, I chose to include this picture because I think it's a really beautiful picture. I grew up on a farm plagued by goats, so I feel some kinship with these folks. this photograph was included in a letter to Oscar Tannenbaum from Sarah and her husband in Rosh Pina, Palestine, in 1945 at the end of the war. She is, let me make sure I get this right. She is Oscar's sister-in-law. And I have this written down. I'm going to check myself on this. So she's Oscar's sister, and his brother-in-law in this photograph. And in the letter, she writes and is trying to find their other sister, Racha. And of course, Oscar, who's been pursuing and trying to rescue family members really all over the globe, knows where Racha is and has worked with all kinds of contacts in London, in Europe, in Paris, trying to find all these family members. And so he's able to give her their other sister's address. And I think this shows a couple of things. First of all, they've resettled, this part of the family has resettled in Israel, or what was then Palestine. They have quite a bit of challenges. The letter notes that they've contracted malaria. And the other issue is that family has been scattered to the winds in their attempts to escape Nazi Germany, and no one knows where anybody is, and they're desperate for information. And so Oscar in the United States ends up being able to connect those dots in a way that people scattered around weren't able to. And this photo is just beautiful. Erica, the lone sister amongst all those brothers, got married in 1953 in Dallas. And here we can see Oscar, who gave her away, and then the brothers here, here, and here. And I think it's a beautiful photo for lots of reasons. I had the honor of meeting Erica. She lives in Memphis. She's alive and well, and is just really an encouragement to live a good, healthy life, because she's just rocking and rolling. Okay, this next family is near and dear to my heart. The CHARAPANOVSKY family, or now Albert, as the current last name, married name, I should say. I spent lots of afternoons in the family dining room with photos pulled out, talking about their history, and they trusted us enough to let us take that collection and catalog it and digitize it. And so I want to share some of the most interesting elements, at least to me, from the collection. I think it would be different for anybody looking at it. There's so many things to choose from. Just briefly, I want to share with you that the previous collection, the Rohan collection, has over 300 items, and so does the CHARAPANOVSKY collection. So choosing which items to talk about, to weave their story, is both a great challenge and a lot of fun. So Jeanette Albert was born in Paris to her parents, Zandel and Ida, who were originally from Soroca, Romania. To survive the war, this family went into hiding. Jeanette was given false papers and a false name. Her parents also went into hiding. She spent the duration of the war in hiding, mostly at a boarding school. Her grandparents stayed in Paris, and her grandfather was taken to Drancy and then Auschwitz. And then eventually in 1949, after battling a long illness, Jeanette came to Texas and met her future husband and settled here and had a wonderful, beautiful, very, very nice family. I picked a few items just to talk through this. For some reason, this item attracted me and I wanted to share it with you. This is a ration book. So this is immediate post-war. Everything's still rationed. Scarcity is rampant in Europe. Jeanette credits her mother for saving her and many of their family members. She was tenacious. She thought outside the box. She put herself at great risk to get Jeanette into hiding and to provide for the family. And so this is after the war, when you hope that you can take a deep breath and relax. But here there's limits on coal and textiles, and this is her ration card. I wanted to just highlight something on this slide. Jeanette's family is not unique in this way, but certainly was especially challenging because of the spellings. Many Jewish families who survived in Western Europe had ended up in Western Europe while moving from east to west within Europe. So this family's from Romania. They come to Paris, and there's various ways the family spells their name. And then it gets often further shortened or the spelling changed as they immigrate further west, even into the United States. Add to that the idea of having, you know, Jewish names, false identities. It gets very complicated very fast. And so this is a good way to look at this. So Ida's name is Ida CHARAPANOVSKY. Okay, her alternative name is Ginda. Her false identity is Irina or Irene. And then the different spellings of her last name, just to pick a few, are here below. So you can see quickly that you have to have basically a pretty intense index or finding aid to continually make sure you have the right person going with the right thing in the right direction. Okay, well, I picked this photo for, I guess, sentimental reasons. This is Jeanette and her cousin, Monique, in their apartment in Paris in 1936. And I have a 3-year-old who plays with the phone all the time. And so I thought it was one of those timeless things, although now play phones look like little bricks because they're supposed to be cell phones now. So eventually I look forward to showing this photo to my daughter and explaining to her how this phone works, just to keep her interested. This is a photo, this is pretty rare. This is a photo of Jeanette in hiding. So she's been placed in hiding. Her mother had to move her at least once. She had false papers, a false identity. And so here she is at her boarding school where she's in hiding. And Jeanette reflects that she was very fortunate and felt fairly safe through the war, and credits her mother with that. I picked this photo. Jeanette eventually made her way to the United States, to Dallas. I picked this photo because I just can't imagine a more American scene. When I imagine Jeanette coming to America from Paris and landing in Carrollton, and then this photo just seems quintessential America. If you space these folks out a little more, if you moved Larry about 6 feet this direction, we could have ourselves a pandemic picnic photo right here. Okay, this next family, as with some of our families, the Meyer family worked with us for quite a while on their donation and had a really interesting story to tell through their artifacts that they donated. So let's just get right into it. So Paul, Kathy, and Ellie fled Nazi Germany in 1939 and lived in Holland for about a year. This was fairly common, and it really was a shell game where Jewish families worked very hard to establish and attain the appropriate paperwork to escape Nazi Germany. It was very difficult. You had to have an incredible amount of wherewithal and even finances to make this possible, but then you had to have passage to get to your destination, and that became increasingly impossible as the war escalated. And then, of course, you have the expanding borders where Hitler's aggressive foreign policy is expanding the borders of the Reich, west and east, and encroaching more and more and more on the Jewish people living in those areas. So even though Paul, Kathy, and Ellie made it out of Nazi Germany, Holland, of course, as we know, was next on the list to be conquered by the Nazis. And so they were imminently in danger again. Eventually, they did make it out. They made it to the United States. They were fortunate in that Kathy's uncle had established himself in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and was able to sponsor the family, and they moved there. And eventually Ellie married and moved to Dallas and was an actress. And we have some pretty cool stuff about her acting career here in Dallas. But I didn't include that, but it is pretty cool stuff. We like to remind our visitors and ourselves about before the war. What was under attack? What was in danger? And so this picture really hones in on that. This is 3 generations, women who have a life in Germany, a respectable business and family life. And I think it's a beautiful photograph in and of itself. And Ellie Mayer is right here in the middle, and cute as a little biscuit. And then to show kind of the other side of their journey, they make it all the way to the United States. And this is her high school graduation from Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I think this is a great photo. Perfect 1945. Everyone is being serious, as they should be. And they're graduating from high school, which must have felt exciting and daunting. And then I threw this in because it's completely unique to our collection. We have nothing else like it. Our collection, as you might imagine, is chiefly 20th century, and really 90% of our collection can be dated to the 1930s and 40s. So it's rare that we find something in our collections that goes back before that. So we have some 19th century, but not very much. And this artifact, the Meyer family donated to us. And it's a beautiful and interesting artifact in and of itself. So I wanted to share it with you. Excuse me. This is a set of brass weights. It's from 1779. It was produced in Wicklinghausen, which is just east of Dusseldorf, and it was used to weigh and measure material either for an apothecary or a jeweler. I don't know for sure, but that's the most likely use that I could find. It's completely intact and considering its age, in decent shape, although it is very fragile. The little weights are, I mean, not any bigger than a dime. And I just wanted to include this because this shows the deep history of the Meyer family, because they owned a factory in Worms, but before that, I'm not sure what they were doing, but I can imagine that this was passed down generation to generation, and it's amazing that it made its way to first Ardmore and now Dallas. Okay, leaving our Holocaust section, I wanted to highlight some artifacts, really the first artifacts that we brought in to feature the modern civil rights and human rights battle here in the United States. The Harris family, we had a special exhibit several years ago calling the Fighting for the Right to Fight, about African Americans in World War II. And after that exhibit, a local man named Fred Harris came to me and said, "Hey, I have these photos. I know they're important, but I don't know what to do with them, and I want to share them with you." First, these photos gave me a reason to investigate African Americans in World War II that I hadn't had before, and I was grateful for that. And so I just want to share with you briefly that 2.5 million African Americans registered for the draft during World War II. The Army was still segregated, but 1.2 million served in the military, and many of them made a huge contribution to the war effort. And I think it's a pity that they're not represented as much as they should be in pop culture and in our studies, because you know, when I think about big blockbuster films and so on, it's just not as representative as I would hope it would be. Another side to that is that African American women volunteered in huge numbers to serve, and many of them served as nurses. Significantly, for those of us familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen, there's a little more awareness of African Americans fighting in the Western theater, in the European theater, I'm sorry. But I had never considered that there were a great number of African Americans fighting in the Navy, and they were in the Pacific theater. And this collection represents that. So these three gentlemen were together in basic training, and Thomas Harris, the far right, his nephew donated this collection. I'm sorry, his son donated this collection. And I think this photograph is so sweet and hopeful, and it's incredible to me. There's a couple of photos, and I at this moment wish I'd included one of them in combat or in the Pacific Theater, and so it's a really interesting collection. This next photo is Aunt Sarah. So this is Fred's Aunt Sarah, and she's working as a nurse. And as an archivist, when we see photos that show home life or work life in different eras and representing different populations, that's so meaningful and valuable. And so having this photo showing a woman, an African American woman, a nurse in her working environment is great. Okay, at this point, I'm shifting gears a little bit to talk about highlight items. So for these, I'm not talking about a whole collection or trying to represent the collection as a whole in any way. I'm just picking some items that tell us a little bit more about history that are available for further research. So the first item I picked, and I've done a whole lunch and learn on this collection before, it's really fascinating. This is a photo of Helen Kramer Fogel. She's one of our local survivors who's since passed away. She is right here. I want to make sure I get that right. And this photo is fascinating to us because she is in a women's seminary learning about how to teach Hebrew and other religious topics in Romania. And she was a student from 1946 to 47, and she had survived the Holocaust. She has a beautiful memoir. We have it in our collection. It's also available online. Really some amazing reflection on her time growing up and the effects of the Holocaust on and how it decimated her family, how she rebuilt her life. I really encourage you to take a look at it. One thing I want to mention about this photo, one part of it that is so significant is that here you see this blossoming of Jewish life, these young women coming together to learn so that they can become teachers. As communism encroaches, they have to go underground. You're not really allowed to practice religion openly in communist countries, and so many of these Jewish people who had survived the Holocaust end up having to basically hide any religious practice that they're able to maintain, and whatever feelings they had about immigrating before, for some, this was enough to really push them further towards immigrating out of their country. Okay, this photo, for some of us here in North Texas, we're familiar with Dr. Zuzana Ojvath. She's a professor at UTD in the Ackerman Center. And this is a photograph that she shared with us of her second grade class. And so she's right here. And this is really a devastating photo because Juji has shared with us that only 2 out of this entire class survived the Holocaust. So in a way, it's a microcosm of the destruction that the Nazis wrought on so many of these populations. This is another really interesting photo. Les Middleman was in a forced labor brigade. He spent some time in the Army. He escaped into the woods and encountered a resistance group, and through it all, he's somehow survived and then rebuilt his family. And so this whole collection is really fascinating and worth a look for sure. returning to the collections we have featuring human rights, this artifact is currently on display. It's in our exhibit in the museum called The Fight for Civil Rights in the South. And it takes people by surprise because for a time there was a whole day at the State Fair of Texas dedicated to the Ku Klux Klan. So this is a pretty challenging part of our own history here in Dallas. The fascinating thing about this artifact, it's a program that you would get to, as a sponsored event with speakers, and you could be initiated into the KKK if you wanted to at this event, sponsored by illustrious local and national companies, as you can see here. The speakers were respected Klan card-carrying members of the political elite in Dallas. People that were well known and well respected. In investigating this collection, I found out that in the 1920s, the KKK received a majority in the Texas legislature. So it's really pretty interesting. There's a good, it was mentioned to me, and someone reminded me that there's a good article about this time in the Dallas magazine. Okay. Now this photo is from a really interesting collection from the Wolf-Pinker family. And I picked it because it, to me, shows a carefree side of youth before the rise of Nazi aggression. These young women are on a day trip. They are from a school that's well known in Frankfurt called Das Philanthropin, which was a Jewish day school. And I like it because they're obviously on the side of a river and they're wearing, I keep thinking dirndl, but I think Germans call it something different, but basically traditional dress. I picked this photo because I was on the phone with Max Glauben, one of our local survivors. Many of you know him well, a few weeks ago, and it was he and Frieda's 67th wedding anniversary, and we have this photo in our collection of their wedding day, and I think it's just beautiful. Max Glauben survived several camps and is an inspiration to many of us, and Frieda even more so. This photo, I wanted to show kind of the other aspects of survivors' lives. So, a survivor survived the Holocaust or was a child in hiding or a refugee or a kinder transportee, but that's just one part of their entire personality and contribution. And so this fella right here is Mike Jacobs, who was a Holocaust survivor and also a founder of our museum. And he spent his life after he came to the United States, he spent a lot of time working with soccer clubs. And this photo is of a soccer club that was inside a displaced persons camp in Germany. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. And as we start to wrap up, I wanted to share with you a very recent acquisition. Marcia Malk and her husband came to visit just a few months ago because she had some letters that she thought were important. And these letters are between a woman in Latvia and her brother in the United States, and they're in Yiddish. And there's 4 of them, and they were thankfully translated. And I just want to share with you because sometimes people say to me, well, don't we know everything about the Holocaust? What more could be out there? And this collection was brought in right before we went, right before the pandemic. And so it's an acquisition from 2020. And it's the first anything we have about the Latvian experience. And so here she's corresponding with her brother and reflecting on how many of her children are already dead, and the struggles her other children are undergoing. And she wonders if she'll be able to survive. And she's grateful that her brother has sent her money because she's desperate to be able to purchase food and basic necessities and to help her children. And so again, very recent acquisition showing another aspect, another location, another story. Finally, we're going to feature some more of these artifacts, but we're going to actually do a whole lecture entirely on our Eichmann trial artifacts. This is an etching or a sketch done by a court reporter during the Eichmann trial, and it's of the 3 judges. But I just want to give you a little preview because we'll have a whole lecture on September 22nd. Dr. Sarah Abosh will join me to talk about the historical context, and then we'll really walk you through. We have some pretty impressive Eichmann trial artifacts in the museum, so we're going to share that in a lecture on September 22nd. Okay, before I take questions, I just want to let you know that I'm very, very eager for any questions if you want to email me at archives@dhhrm.org, and I invite you to go visit the museum's website and hit that research tab, and we're at www.dhhrm.org. And please, if you have questions, put it in your Q&A, and Dr. Sarah Abosh and I will take our best crack at it.
Felicia, that was fantastic. It's always amazing to have you do historical heavy lifting. I love to see it. Before we start with the first question and answer, I wanted to share a comment from Fran Berg, who is in the audience tonight. Fran is one of our strongest supporters. She's also a commissioner on the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. And Fran notes that the Mayer scale that you were showing from the 1700s is a jeweler's scale, and that her brother is in the business and has been collecting these scales for over 50 years, and that they weigh gold and individual stones, but that it's very, very cool that we have the whole set in a box. So it's always nice to know that the collection is being highlighted properly. I
actually did some research on this set of scales, and I saw that it could be used for jewelers, but also for apothecary, or a doctor could have some use for it. But absolutely, having it so complete, having even the paper still with the description, I mean, that's amazing that it's made it to us. And I can share with you that the family member who donated that artifact takes very good care of her belongings, and you can tell that's maybe a family trait since it made it 300 years. I'm gonna see if I can open the chat.
Okay.
Do I have any questions?
Felicia, there was a question earlier asking if you could highlight some of our other human rights collections. Just talk a little bit about them, because I know since you've been with the museum, you've definitely been pushing hard to bring some of those in.
So we have a handful of other human rights collections. One collection came in, and I talked about it today during a program for teachers, but we received a donation of a walking stick that was found underground in an underground tunnel in a Japanese internment camp. So that was really unique. It's a beautiful artifact. We've been doing a lot of work before the pandemic to collect about Cambodia. We haven't made a lot of inroads for artifact collecting in that area, but we've done a lot of work to collect oral histories, which is actually increasingly possible, but hadn't been possible until that community was started opening up. Am I missing?
Major and Bow.
Oh yeah, this year, 2020, we got our first artifact collection documenting the fight for equality in the LGBTQ community here in Dallas. And so there was a couple, they were the second couple to be married, but they protested for their equal right to become married, and were handcuffed to the courthouse. And so we have their handcuffs and some photographs documenting their story, and then we took an oral history with them. So we interviewed them about their experiences. And we're looking all the time, and, you know, besides the pandemic, we're eager to hear about people who tried to move the needle and increase or expand their human rights in all kinds of areas, and specifically in the local context. I'm sorry about my cat. She's a very bad cat. So we're collecting new things like that all the time. I see another question about, do we collect Holocaust artifacts even this long after the Holocaust happened? And as you saw with that Latvian artifact, that was an artifact, those collections of letters were from 1941, and we brought that collection in 2020. And I can relate that even during the pandemic, I'm fielding multiple donor calls a week. I think that people hold on to things until they find a place where they think it can serve a greater purpose. For many people, especially when they've undergone trauma, whether it's a human rights abuse or the Holocaust, letting go of these tangible reminders of that difficult history is another form of loss. And so it can take a generation or two. Another thing I say is that every generation has an archivist or a historian born into it. And so for many of us, we're the inheritor of family items that we don't know a lot about, but we know they're important. And you can partner with the museum, and we can help you figure out if they are important or if they have a place in our museum's collections. And I entreat you, please reach out to us and we can help you through that. I think the other thing that happens is it's overwhelming. Sometimes, you know, grandma or grandpa has a house full of stuff, and it can become so overwhelming to discern whether this item or that item has historical value. And again, that's something Sarah and I have done multiple times, is go to families' homes and help them, even after the artifact's owner is deceased. We can help the next of kin make those difficult decisions without the emotional burden that the family carries. And we're very comfortable with that. In fact, you know, when I was a very, very little baby archivist, back when I was working in the University of Arkansas, you know, my former boss said, well, you have to be prepared to go into attics and basements and closets and sheds. And that's very true. I've been there and done that, and will continue to do it. So please reach out if you're trying to decide. Is there a way to watch recorded survivor testimonies? That's a great question. So I'm glad you asked. We have about 200 testimonies that have been collected by the museum. Oh, I'm just going to get that cat real fast. So sorry, I almost put out a warning about my toddler, and little did I know my cat would be the problem. So we have about 200 oral history testimonies in our collection, and we're in the process of putting all of those online right now. And that will be done within the next month or two. Sarah knows this big long story, but there was a coding problem with the oral histories in particular, but we're working on it. We'll get those up online shortly. And then also, when the museum reopens, we have the full 55,000 testimonies in the Shoah database available in the research room, and you can make an appointment to view any of those. And then we're also a partner with the Yale Fortunoff Oral History Project, and they have about 15 or 16,000 testimonies at Yale that you can also access in our reading room. So lots of opportunities to study and learn, and we're eager to do more of that. Did I miss any questions, Sarah, that you see?
I don't think so. I think we are good. I would just give one more plug for the Eichmann trial program. Felicia and I actually flew into New York and interviewed the man who, as a bohemian traveling through Europe, ended up in Israel and knew a friend of a friend, and ended up in the courtroom without any permission, and was the only live sketch artist they had there that for a big chunk of the trial. And we have many of his original sketches, and he then donated more after we interviewed him. So it's an interesting. It'll be interesting, I promise you. But I want to.
That's another story that you have to file under. We could not make this stuff up if we tried. I mean, the people.
But they have to come back to hear this one. So what I would like to do is turn this over to Annie Black to close out the evening.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Sarah. I will quickly mention the date of that program. It's not on our website just yet, but you can hold it in your calendar. September 22nd. Will be that program on the Eichmann trial. So something to look forward to. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our community partners for your ongoing support. We encourage you to take a look at our website, dhhrm.org, for all of our upcoming programs. We do something at least once a week, generally more. So we hope you'll stick with us and hope to see you again soon. Everyone have a safe evening, and we'll see you next time.